Hello, Richard Morris here from Morris Succession Lawyers. It's almost Easter, and I thought I would do a bit of a talk before I am completely swamped by, I think it's 13 children between the age of 10 and 3 that I'll be seeing over Easter between my own children and their cousins. So I'm sure that will leave me like an utter husk of a person. But before the Easter break, my wife did tell me this morning to wear some Easter Bunny ears for this video, but I forgot to bring them to work. So here we are. But anyway, I thought I'd just talk about death benefit nominations. Had a bit of a conversation on LinkedIn about them earlier this week, just in terms of retail and industry funds. When it comes to non-binding nominations, my view is that they are completely useless as an instrument and lead to clients thinking that they've done something or put something in place that has meaning and is going to have some control over what happens with their superannuation when they pass away. Now, I think the superannuation rate's going up, I think maybe at the end of this financial year. I'm not sure of the exact date off the top of my head, but more and more money is being poured into superannuation. We're starting to see a bit more political interest in taxing and putting limits on what people can have in superannuation as the rates go up. And it's a big asset for most people. It's probably the biggest asset anyone has outside of their home. And a lot of people also have more money in superannuation than what their home's worth. Now, when you think about it, most people would have a will and they'd be familiar with the idea of having a will. But the will doesn't cover what happens with your superannuation unless you have a nomination, a binding nomination for that to go to your legal personal representative or your estate, which is the same thing. Legal personal representative is just superannuation talk for your executor or the administrator of your estate. Now, unless you've got one of those, your will is basically meaningless when it comes to superannuation. And if you have a non-binding nomination, no matter what you've put there, ultimately the trustee of your superannuation fund, so if that's a retail fund or an industry fund like Australian Super or Hester or CBUS or any number of those, from my experience, they don't seem to put any weight whatsoever on a non-binding nomination. And it seems that the primary focus of the superannuation funds is dependency. So they look more to who you were living with, who was financially dependent on you at the time, which can really throw up some unusual decisions for clients. Because say you've got 3 children, 2 of them have moved out of home and now independent, you've got 1 child living at home. The super funds most likely, from my experience, will pay most of that money over to the child who's living at home. They'll ignore the needs of those independent children who have moved out. And typically that's not what people want. They don't want an imbalance between their children. Normally they would want an equal split between their kids, unless there's been some other issues which may or may not come into it. But even if you've got a will that goes 3 ways, you've got a non-binding nomination that goes 3 ways between your children, the super funds just don't take any notice of it. They really focus on this dependency factor. And there's talk, last I heard, from the Law Council of Australia, I think was the body was lobbying to basically have the superannuation laws changed so that if you didn't have a nomination or you had a non-binding nomination, then it should just go to your estate. And if you don't have a will, at least there's statutory rules that apply, which are meant to be as close as possible to what a person would want to happen with their estate, as opposed to this trustee discretion that the trustees of these super funds exercise to come up with unusual decisions in the context of what I see as a lawyer that does a lot of estate planning. Rarely do I see a decision from a superannuation fund that reflects what I find testators want. So it's a real trap. I can't understand why non-binding nominations were ever made. I guess it may have been there must have been some viewpoint at the time that super funds would take more notice of them, but they simply don't. And people think that, oh, yes, I've jumped online, I've done a nomination, or I've got something in place, I did it 10 years ago, this is what will happen with my super. But when you dig down into it, if it's a non-binding nomination, it's basically pointless. And if it's a lapsed binding nomination, it too is pointless, because even if you put a binding nomination in place 5 years ago with specifics about what you want, if that nomination is now lapsed, the super funds don't care. They'll make a decision that they think is appropriate, and it probably isn't what you think is appropriate. So enjoy your Easter break, have a great Easter, but if you're with your loved ones over Easter and you don't have a binding nomination in place, give it a bit of thought, talk to your solicitor, and if you don't have someone, or you want to talk to our estate planning specialists at Morris Succession Lawyers, and please feel free to reach out. We'd be more than happy to help you with that.